the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang.
Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. On today's episode, we're going to talk Bukayo Saka. We're going to talk Martin Odegaard. We're also going to discuss the future of Eberechi Eze. Is he somebody that you'd like to see come to Emirates Stadium? We're also going to take a ton of your questions, so make sure that you're getting them in throughout the live broadcast, and I'll pick up as many of those as I possibly can on today's show. It's a bit cloudy and gloomy here in North London today, which is disappointing. I was looking forward to spending a lot of the day out in the garden. I suppose if there's a threat of rain, I'm going to get less pressure from the wife to continue working on the garden, because over the last few days I've been trying to tidy up the garden and trying to get on top of it. Hay fever kicks in though, and it makes it a very, very unpleasurable experience. So maybe the fact that the weather is a little bit gloomy and it doesn't look like that great might just ease the nagging about the garden. Who knows? Big hello to everybody joining us in the live chat. I can see there are plenty of you with us as always. Thank you for being here. What have we got? We've got Chrissy in the chat. We've got Stefan. We've got Glenn. Abubakar is with us. Wesbird is with us. Gunner329. Hacker. Russ Morgan. Benjamin is with us, who says, what do we think of Tottenham? I think we all know the answer to that. We've also got Damien Rodney, who joins us from Blackpool. We've got Social Joins. Damien, Brian, Dave R, Rob, Bob. We've got Yorgos joining us from Cyprus. Oh man, what I'd give to be in Cyprus right now. Just chilling on the beach, taking in the sunshine. Yeah, hopefully at some point in the summer we'll get to nip over there, but we'll see. We will see. Okay, let's get into today's stories. There are quite a few to get through. And then, of course, we're going to focus on your questions. So make sure that you've got them loaded into the live chat. And let's begin today's pod by talking Bukayo Saka. Now, of course, England suffered what could be described as an embarrassing defeat at the hands of Iceland yesterday at Wembley. It was their final send-off match before, of course, going out to Germany for Euro 2024. And the last game is always one where people look at and try to figure out what the lineup might look like when the tournament starts, who looks like they're in red-hot form, who maybe looks like they're not quite at it. That's what it's all about, right? That's what these warm-up games are for. And normally, if they go well, they can create a buzz and an excitement around a tournament. I said this on the radio yesterday because I was speaking to Rory Jennings about this, and he said, you know, this is the opportunity to see how some of these players are going to fare and have a look at Gareth's lineup and all the rest of it. And I said, I don't really know how to read these games. I find them quite difficult because on the one hand, you've got a group of players that already know that they're in the squad, because Gareth Southgate was due to announce the squad initially this morning, on Saturday morning. And he brought that announcement forward. Now, I think the real reason he brought that announcement forward was because it started to get leaked, who was in, who was out. You had players like James Maddison posting things on social media confirming that he wasn't a part of the group. And if you're Gareth Southgate, you don't really want it to come out like that. If you're the FA, you don't really want it to come out like that. You want to get in front of it, which is what England did. So this final game, it could have been the game where everybody was still fighting for a place in the squad. Instead, it wasn't that. Instead, it was a group of players that already know that they're on the plane and will be fearful, worried, and concerned of overdoing it in a meaningless friendly and potentially ruling themselves out of a tournament. By that same token, there was an opportunity for some of the fringe players to show what they've got and maybe give Gareth Southgate something to think about ahead of the opening group game. But what you got was no one really giving it anything special. A clear concern, I think, from a lot of the players about pushing themselves too hard physically. Is this a consequence of the grueling schedule that we have here in the Premier League? Maybe that we get to this point in the year and people are just flat out. I think you've also got to factor in the fact that, Bukayo Saka was coming back from injury. Harry Kane's been coming back from injury. Those guys were never going to be at their best. Kobbie Mainoo still finding his feet in the midfield for England. I think he's a really good player for what it's worth. But it just wasn't a very good England performance, basically. And to lose 1-0 at home to Iceland is exactly what Gareth Southgate wouldn't have wanted, because there are always question marks around him. He picked a squad that the majority of people felt was bolder and braver than ones he'd picked in the past. He left out some big names. And you think, okay, maybe everyone's going to get behind him now. And then they go and lose at home to Iceland and everybody starts. Get him out before the tournament. You wouldn't believe how many posts I saw last night from people saying, get him out before the tournament starts. But listen, I've said it before. I'm not a particularly big England fan. I'm from a Greek background. So, I'm interested in what England do, and I'm interested in the stories that England create, but I'm not particularly fussed whether they do well or not. I just want to see good football, and I want to see the Arsenal players thriving and doing really, really well. And with Declan Rice in there and Bukayo Saka in there, to see those guys do well at a tournament will be great. And it was great to see Aaron Ramsdale start the game last night, although he too has received some criticism for his part in the Icelandic goal, which again, I feel is unfair. Like I've said this before, we've talked about it before. I think people always point at goalkeepers when they get beaten at their near post. I think the way that the scorer cut inside of Jordan Henderson so easily, Jordan Henderson, I beg your pardon. Why is he on my mind? John Stones. The way he cut inside John Stones was really easy. And I think that's where the fault is, rather than looking at the goalkeeper too much. But hey, I'm always going to defend my own, aren't I? But that's not the real big story from this, because if I'm being completely honest, and if I veer away from the sensationalism and the sensationalist take that is going to be doing the rounds this morning around England, my actual issue is not so much with what happened on the pitch, because I think it's a meaningless friendly, and I do back England to get out of that group quite easily. I'm sure they will. I wouldn't be too concerned if I were an England fan. But what I really didn't like was the coverage of this defeat. And, I've seen a lot of people go around on Twitter this morning and hammer it and have a go at it and highlight some of the particular bits of coverage. I'm all over the shop this morning. Look, this made me feel uncomfortable, and I'll explain why. So if I just bring this up on the screen, you will see these are the back pages of the Sun and of the Star, and obviously there's a bit from BBC Sport and there's a bit from the Telegraph, and you can see that one man is included in all four of those reports. Bukayo Saka. Why Bukayo Saka? Why Bukayo Saka, who came on after 65 minutes to replace Anthony Gordon? Why not focus on someone who was on the pitch for far longer? Why not focus on someone who had greater responsibility in England's overall very, very poor and dire performance? I just don't get it. I don't get it. Look, I think that we've seen, being completely open and honest and candid about this, I think that we've seen Black England players get a rough ride in the past. And we've seen them picked on for things that I don't think other players would get picked on for. We've seen big stories made of their lifestyle, of, for example, the tattoos they choose to have. And I think all of that is bang out of order and needs to stop. We live in 2024. Why are we still even having these conversations? Obviously, in Bukayo Saka's case, he received horrendous abuse after England lost the Euro final at Wembley to Italy. A game in which I thought, given his lack of experience on the international stage at that point, his age and all the rest of it, I thought Gareth Southgate was a madman, actually, to ask Bukayo Saka to take a penalty there. And I remember him walking up to take that penalty and thinking, no, like, he's not ready for this. As great as he is, as talented as he is, as exciting a footballer as he is, this is a big thing. And because we've seen it in this country over and over again, what's going to happen if he misses the penalty. And lo and behold, it happened. And the abuse that he received after that was abhorrent, was completely unacceptable. I think it's made him stronger, but that doesn't mean it's okay that it happened. I think you can try and take the positive out of a bad thing, but that doesn't mean that you're justifying that thing in the first place. And the racist abuse that he and others in that England group received was just disgusting. In this instance here, I do think that editors will go for the best pictures. And to see an England player lying down flat on his face after a game is obviously a good picture. The one with the plane, the one with him sort of throwing like that, you know, or whatever it is. If you're using the headline plain awful, then it kind of works. But I just think you've got to be mindful of these things. I think that you will try and you will find as an editor the best picture or the image that you think is going to grab attention. I can't sit and say that the intention of every single person that picked these pictures was to go at Bukayo Saka. But given what we've seen happen in the past and the consequences of highlighting black young men that play for England after defeats and failures, the consequence of that is that there's always vile, horrible, racist abuse. So I think that people have got a responsibility to think long and hard about what they're putting on these pages. It's not to say that every individual that made up these pages did it with the intention of racially abusing or getting racial abuse directed and aimed at Bukayo Saka, because to say that is completely unfair. I don't know who did it. I don't know who they are. I don't know what their values are. And I've always said, I don't want to throw people under a bus for stuff because I've had it done to me before. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. But I do think there is a responsibility to think better and think more about this kind of thing before you put that kind of stuff out, given the history, the recent history as well. Let's take some of you guys' thoughts and comments on this. What else have we got? Let me see. Someone giving me shit for not being a massive England fan. I've lived in England my whole life, yeah, but that doesn't make me English by blood. And you are what you feel, right? And I've got huge respect for this country because I live in this country. I've grown up. I've been able to have a career in this country, raise a family in this country. But it doesn't mean I got to like a football team full of rival players. What else have we got in the chat? Zamood says, Saka is getting a lot of stick and he played at least 15 minutes and hasn't played for weeks with his injury. Absolutely. You know, for Bukayo Saka, it was just about getting some minutes under his belt ahead of the tournament kicking off. Russ says Saka is the poster boy. You're absolutely right. You know, Saka is one of the stars, the most likable people in this group. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it could have been put up because of that, I guess. G-Dog saying it is shameful. Again, I'm going to be clear. I don't think that it's... This is a really difficult subject to talk about because whatever I say, someone's going to give me shit. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I'm not sitting here saying that whoever made those back pages is a racist, because how could I possibly know that? What I am saying is that given what's happened in recent history with the likes of Bukayo Saka and other young black footballers that have been a part of this England setup, I think it's irresponsible to plaster Bukayo Saka over the back of every newspaper, pretty much, or a lot of the newspapers, and as the head on every website, when you know what's going to come. That's my point. What else have we got? Sam says, no doubt they will plaster Foden all over the back pages when it's Saka carrying the team in the Euros. Yeah, probably. Big hello to Alfred, who joins us from Costa Rica, by the way. He says, I love your content. Thank you very much. Blessed One says, hello, Harry. Good to meet you once again. I'm greeting you from Minnesota in the USA. I really like your show. Your analysis is cool and doesn't raise someone's blood pressure. Good. That's the plan. The Onyx Lens says, I came for the Eze talk. Don't worry. We're going to get to Eberechi Eze. There's loads. There's loads and loads to get on to. Right. We'll leave that now. We'll leave the back pages bit and we'll move on to Another story, we're going to talk about Arsenal's player of the season. He goes by the name of Martin Odegaard. But would he have been your winner? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so Martin Odegaard was named Arsenal's player of the year yesterday. That was a fan vote, of course. Odegaard won the vote with 33%. Declan Rice came second with 24%. And William Saliba came third with 20%. The thing is it was such a good season in terms of like individuals performing at a really high level throughout, that I think there are a number of players that could have been on this list and I'd have been fine with it that just aren't there. And that's because of the rich array of options. For example, Bukayo Saka, who we've just been talking about, could have easily been on this list. I think Gabriel at the back could have easily been on this list. I think Ben White could have easily been on this list. I think Kai Havertz could have been on this list. I think there are a lot of players that you could have put into this equation. This is what the people have gone for. And it's just a reminder again, isn't it, of what an absolute bit of genius it was to sign up Martin Odegaard for £35 million. This guy was on the peripheries at Real Madrid, not playing, being sent constantly out on loan, back and forth, not really making an impact there, not getting the opportunity to showcase his obvious talent. And Arsenal brought him in initially on loan, gave him an opportunity, gave him a go. I thought he settled in incredibly quickly at the time. And I remember saying this back then. I was shocked by how fit he was, given that he'd played so little football up until that point in that campaign. And he came in January and finished the season really, really strongly. And again, I know I point to this quite a bit because I cannot believe to this day that people were arguing with me about this. I repeatedly said he's the one. He's the one that we need to sign in the summer when we were looking for that creative midfield outlet. And I was having people tell me we should have signed Emi Buendia instead. And I'll never forget that because you would not believe the amount of messages I got after I released an episode in which I said Emi Buendia is not the one. And there's no guarantee that what he's done in the Championship at the time at Norwich City would translate into goals and assists and sort of tangible contributions in the Premier League. I look at that now and I think what an absolute masterstroke that was. Martin Odegaard at £35 million is just an incredible bit of business. Let me know who you would have had as your top three and in order. And I'll pick out some of those comments and we'll discuss them. Because as I say, there are a number of players that probably could have been in this. If I was ranking my player of the year, and I think I probably did this in my end of season review, but obviously, you know, time goes on, you maybe think about it, you analyze it a little bit more, you have time to process it. I probably would have gone with Odegaard top. Rice, considering it was his debut season, probably does have to go in second. I think the defense was so incredible that you need to have a representative from that. I personally think that although William Saliba played every single minute, which is an incredible feat, I personally think that Gabriel just edged it this season, or the season that's just finished, in terms of individual levels. So I might have put Gabriel above Saliba, but I wouldn't have had a problem with Saka being in the top three, Havertz or whatever. White too. I think there's a lot of players that you could include in there. Let's see what you guys are saying on this. AJ has gone with Gabriel. Lalietia says, at points in the run-in from January, Odegaard reached levels that made him look like the best player in the league. I agree. Darren says Odegaard was missing when it mattered. Was he really? MM says Odegaard is showcasing, I beg your pardon, the level he was touted to be. Shows that environment is key. Kai Havertz is next. Yorgos says Odegaard is the best player and the most unique talent we have in our team. And especially in the second half of the season, he was unbelievable. He's an excellent leader as well. Rob says, I'm surprised that Odegaard was so far ahead. I feel as though those top three and the others you mentioned were very close together, re quality. What else have we got? The Villa player, just going back to the point that we were talking about the newspapers earlier. Hi, Harry. I think the media need to stop spreading propaganda towards our players. Last week, Watkins was shown on the main page of the England News and it brought abuse towards him on social media. Look, I'm not saying, I know we've done this subject already, but just to respond to this comment, I'm not saying that you can't post a picture of a player. Like, you have to post a picture of somebody, right? I just think they need to be mindful of what does happen off the back of it. Obviously, the root of the problem is not the editor that maybe didn't think about it enough. The problem is the idiot that goes on social media and abuses. But why give them the ammunition, if that makes sense? Anyway, Damien's gone with Rice. Tom's gone Odegaard, Gabriel, Rice in that order. Sam has gone Rice, Odegaard, Gabriel. See, a lot of people including Gabriel in theirs, which I feel would have been very, very fair. AJ's gone Gabriel, Rice, Saliba. Wesbird's gone Odegaard, Rice, Gabriel in that order. Khalid says Odegaard, Rice, Gabriel too. Yeah, it's incredible. The fact that we've got lots and lots of different names being thrown into the equation, and that people will say it's out of order and unfair on Bukayo Saka. I think the fact that he's not in there is a testament to how much this team's improved, because he won the Player of the Year, didn't he, 2 seasons in a row, and now Martin Odegaard's won it 2 seasons in a row. So that shows you the level that those guys are hitting, because this team is getting better and better and better. We're adding more and more talent every single summer. And yeah, we're in a great place. We really, really are. Okay, we're going to take another short pause. And when we come back, we're going to talk Eberechi Eze, which I know a lot of you are here to hear about. But if I could just ask you, before I do that, smash a like on the video. There's only 59 likes on the board, which is nowhere near the number of people that are with us watching live right now. Like, subscribe, all the rest of it. It really, really, really does help. If you're listening on audio, if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. If you're on Spotify, leave us a review too. That really, really does help. We're going to take a really short break. And when we come back, we're going to turn our attention to Eberechi Eze and your questions from the live chat.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
Okay, let's talk Eberechi Eze. The Crystal Palace man is not definitely going to be on the move this summer, but is obviously somebody that people are talking about as a potentially very, very good signing for anybody that can get their hands on him. Now, the reason I talk about this and the reason I discuss this is because yesterday it was revealed on the Daily, or in the Daily Mail, by Sami Mokbel, that Eberechi Eze has a minimum fee release clause of £60 million, and this fee would rise by around an additional £8 million in performance-related add-ons. So when people were talking a few weeks ago about maybe trying to get Eberechi Eze out of Crystal Palace Football Club and trying to figure out and work out exactly what that would take in terms of money, well, there you have it. There is a 60 million release clause, which will be supplemented by another £8 million in performance-related add-ons. So in total, you're talking about £68 million for Eberechi Eze. Now, the question is Eberechi Eze, who is with the England squad, is going to the European Championships, has been in fine form for Crystal Palace over the past season, is he worth £68 million? And should he be a priority for Arsenal this summer? We'll get into that now, and I want to get your thoughts from the comments as well. First of all, let me know, is he worth that? Is he worth that? Please do let me know. Let's go over to his transfer mark page and let's have a look at his 23-24 season, in which he made 27 appearances. So he missed 11 games for Crystal Palace in the league last season. 11 goals, which is more than 1 in 3 for someone that doesn't play as a striker necessarily. He's got 4 assists. So 15 direct goal contributions in 27 games. Pretty good, pretty respectable. Where I've got a bit of a concern about Eberechi Eze is availability. Okay, it's something that I'm always really nervous about when we go into potentially very big deals like this. And let me be clear, by the way, I'm not saying that Arsenal are doing this. I'm not saying that I've heard that Arsenal are trying to make this happen. All I'm trying to do is figure out whether I think and whether you guys think, or whether I think with you guys' help, Eberechi Eze is someone that Arsenal should be considering moving for. We've long heard about Mikel Arteta's intentions to bring in someone that can play on the right-hand side. And Eberechi Eze can play pretty much anywhere as long as he's given that little bit of license and that little bit of freedom. We've seen him operate as a central attacking midfield player. We've seen him operate from the right, and we've seen him operate from the left. And this is a player whose market value has increased dramatically over recent years. If you think about back in 2018 when he was at Queen's Park Rangers, he was valued at €1.5 million. So, just over £1 million. That has slowly crept up to about 3 million, 5 million. And then obviously when he went to Crystal Palace in 2020, that value rose to around about €18 million. Now, I'm quoting these figures in euros because that's what Transfermarkt does, not because it's my currency of preference. But if you just look at this chart here, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see that the rise in his value has been quite dramatic, quite quick. And we're now at a point where we're talking about a player that is valued, according to this, around about €55 million. But obviously that release clause we know is about £60 million, which is about 65 million euros. So, their release clause is about right. It gives them a little bit of protection, but it also gives them a little bit on top of probably what a lot of people feel his market value is. So let's then have a look at some of the other bits and pieces. He's under contract at Crystal Palace until 2027. He is 25 years old, so he's someone that is at the age where you're expecting him to deliver. Now, it's not a project signing. It wouldn't be a project signing, which I guess means you could probably justify that little bit of an extra spend because there's obviously less risk in that. But if I go into his season, this is the bit that worries me. We're talking about 4 separate stints where he wasn't in the team in the Premier League this season. From match day 8 through to match day 10, he missed 3 games, 8, 9, and 10. He missed another 3 games, 3 games after that. And then he was back in the side for 6 weeks before being out again for another 4. And in the run-in, he missed the game away at Fulham back on the 27th of April. So, ability-wise, yeah, I'm all for it. I think he's a really talented player. I think he glides across a football pitch. I think he's got so much going for him, Eberechi Eze. But again, that availability piece is a problem for me. Now, I guess the argument you could make is that if he did join Arsenal, it wouldn't be as a guaranteed starter. But then the question is, can you justify spending £68 million on someone who isn't a guaranteed starter? Are we at that phase now where we can do that for the good of our squad because we've already built up a really good, strong roster of players? I don't know. And maybe if he played less and maybe if there was less reliance upon him, that availability issue perhaps goes away to some point, to some degree, because when he needs a rest, you can give it to him without it seriously and badly damaging, the level of your team. I think at Crystal Palace, it's almost perfect for him at the moment. He's almost stepped into the shoes of Wilfred Zaha, who, of course, was the talisman of that side. It's a well-supported, exciting football club to be at, I think. Playing at Selhurst Park in front of those fans is incredible. I was lucky enough over the last 2 years to commentate on a lot of Crystal Palace games from Selhurst Park, and there were times I couldn't believe how good the atmosphere was. So you'd love to be a part of that. But at the same time, there's going to come a point where he probably wants to move on. And Arsenal, a club that he obviously started at, could be an attractive proposition. From Arsenal's point of view, and I know that it wasn't this regime, if you like, that let him go, but do you think that there's a reluctance from football clubs, with the exception of a few who we've seen do it, to go back and spend big money on a player that actually they had in their hands many, many years ago? Do you think it's almost an admission of the fact that maybe you missed something, and as a result of that, clubs maybe turn their attention elsewhere to try and save face? I don't know. That's an interesting little kind of side note to this discussion and to this point. If I go over to the chat and try and gauge what you guys are thinking here, I'd be interested to see what some of those opinions are, because they seem to vary. Taylor says, crazy to say, but because of the current market, 68 million is a good price for someone of his talent and his age. I would have lost my mind at that price 5 years ago. Joe Musashi says, Eze for 68 million. Yes, please. Sam says, I hope he doesn't go to Spurs because I'd no longer be able to enjoy watching Eze. I find it very hard to believe that Daniel Levy would spend that on him, to be honest with you. Fizzy says, he's worth more. I'd take him over Musiala and Simmons. Artiz says he's worth it. Khalid says, if the 68 could get us Watkins or Kudus, I'd go for them instead. Hacker says, Palace definitely pushing the max price value, just barely worth it, maybe. Yeah, I mean, if I was the one, that has to sign the checks at Arsenal, and I know nobody wants that because you always say that I never want to spend enough money. So I know that nobody actually wants to see that. But if I was the man that signed the checks at Arsenal, that sanctioned these kind of deals and transfers, my opinion on this would very much be that Eberechi Eze is probably worth around the 50 to 55 million pound mark. And so then I would kind of try and gauge and understand from maybe the manager and those in charge of the sporting operation how much you want this guy. And if you do want him, then I think 60 million as a release clause with 8 million of add-ons is probably just about within the parameters that I would allow in terms of the spend. So I guess 68 million, if you really, really want him, isn't crazy, but it is slightly above what I'd value him at. But we've seen that before, right? We wanted Kai Havertz, we had to pay 65 million to get him. Okay, we wanted Declan Rice, who I didn't think at the time was worth 100 million pound. We had to pay over 100 million pound to get him. And over time, where those two players have come into their own, the talk around the price that we paid has obviously died down and goes away. So, yeah, if someone comes in and does well, then who cares about what they cost? And so you've got to decide whether you think that risk is worth taking. Eberechi Eze, as I say, falls just short of that in terms of my own personal valuation. But I'd imagine that if Arsenal really wanted him, they probably wouldn't be put off by that extra bit on top. James D says Eze would be perfect for the Xhaka role, bringing him back home, well worth the money. See, I don't see him playing that role. I don't know if I see Eze as an 8. Like, I don't know if I see that. And the fact that I see him as a 10 is kind of what makes me unsure here. I think he'd be a good deputy to Martin Odegaard, and I think he'd be a good deputy on the right to Bukayo Saka if either of those two players were unavailable. And so maybe the fact that he could play in either of those positions, or he could play from the left, or he could play as the left 8 with someone else coming into the midfield. Maybe, just maybe the fact that he could cover a number of areas does justify that fee. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. Ayoku joins us from Canada and he says, Eze is a fantastic player. We should trigger the release. So she joins, says that Crystal Palace have to pay some of the money back to Reading. And so they need to do good business. Yeah, I think that they're sort of bit on top that we've just been discussing probably is to cover some kind of clause where they need to reimburse one of his previous clubs or whatever. A lot of you saying that he could be Emile Smith-Rowe's replacement. See, this is really interesting, right? Because this is where the outgoings are so important. Because if you get 30 million pounds for Emile Smith-Rowe, and then you're only actually forking out 38 million pounds to bring in Eberechi Eze, it feels a lot more worthwhile, doesn't it? So the outgoings this summer are going to be really, really important. I've said all along that I think we're going to probably have to wait till late in the window to see some of those players move on. I just feel like that's the way these things tend to go. And I think that we're probably going to have to compromise on some of the fees for which we sell. But if you think you can generate that money, then yeah, all good. A lot of you are saying deputy, which is what I've kind of said. I'm not saying he never starts, by the way. I'm saying that he's part of a group of players that could start. Some of you are saying, no, he'd be in my best 11. Who does he replace then? Let me know. Who does he replace in Arsenal's best 11 today, who does he replace? I don't know. Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to take a very, very brief pause. And when I come back, I'm going to focus solely on your questions for the last 10 minutes or so. So please start getting them in the chat box. Make sure that you are liking the video. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel if you're watching us on YouTube. Make sure that if you're listening on audio, you are leaving us a review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, we're trying to get to 500 reviews ASAP. So please, please, please make sure you do that. If you're on Spotify, we want to get to 1,000 reviews on there. And if you could do that, I'd be super, super grateful. So please do that for me. Big hello to William John as well, who is watching us from Nigeria on his holiday. So hope you're having a great holiday, mate. All the best. Okay, let's take that short break. And when we come back, we'll attack your questions from the live chat. Okay, lots of Eze talk. Since we opened this can of worms, the chat box has been full of his name. I reckon if I did a search on that name in that conversation, it would probably come up 1,000 times by now. Lots of you suggesting that I'm wrong to say that he would be part of a rotational group. Fizzy says he easily plays ahead of Martinelli or Trossard at least. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get why people really, really like him, but first of all, I expect Martinelli to come back much stronger next season than the version of Martinelli we saw in 23-24. And I think Leandro Trossard has proven his value and his worth. And I would always argue with Trossard that he is just really clutch, isn't he? In terms of the number of goals, but the times at which he gets them as well. And I think that's really, really difficult to replace. And I think at times in the build-up, Trossard isn't as effective as he could be. But the fact that he is so clutch and steps up in those moments is something that gives him an advantage over a lot of players. James says there's a position there waiting for him. I'm assuming you're talking about the 8 role. I don't see Eberechi Eze as an 8. I'm sorry. I just don't. Damien asks, would you sign Frankie de Jong if he was available? I'd be tempted. I'd have to really kind of look into Frankie de Jong in a lot more detail. Perhaps we'd have to do one of our scouting reports on him to figure out whether or not he'd be right for the Premier League. Technically, he's incredible. We all know that. He is someone that has a wonderful sort of set of technical skills, great in possession, great passer of the ball, fantastic vision. I think looks after the ball really, really well. Barcelona's financial situation could put them in a position where they do need to sell key players or where you could make offers that are just essentially too good for them to turn down, maybe not necessarily seen as a huge deal in your own financial situation, but for Barca it could be a problem if you start turning heads and you start when I say turning heads, I'm not even talking about Frankie de Jong. I'm talking about those sitting in the suits at the top of Barcelona who really do bloody need the money. Would I sign Frankie de Jong if he was available? It would depend on the price for me. He's another one of those players that I quite like, but I've got a very strong limit for. And I think my limit on Frankie de Jong is probably about 65 to 70 million at the real top end. I've never been as big a fan of his as a lot of people. It doesn't mean to say I don't think he's a good player. I do think he's just overhyped a little bit. Pat says, H, is our English quota a concern this window? I mean, if you start to let a lot of these players go, and we think that Nketiah is probably going to go, we think that Smith Rowe's probably going to go, we think that Nelson's going to go, we think that maybe Ramsdale's going to go, then yeah, maybe it's an issue. But for example, if you brought in Eberechi Eze, that would cover for one of those guys. If you promoted Ethan Nwaneri up to the senior squad, which I believe is going to happen, then that's another one that you've covered. And so maybe it's not as bad as we think, that particular situation around the English quota, homegrown, etc., etc. I'm not massively worried about it at this stage, and I don't think it will have a huge bearing on our transfer plans this summer. But I think in time, if we continue to move on the Highlanders and replace them with players that don't help us in that sense, then yeah, it might be something that we have to look at. a little bit later down the line. What else have we got? St. Francis says, Harry, how come we've never heard of Arsenal players having release clauses? All other clubs we've heard have at least one. Why is that what we are missing? Why is that what we are missing? I think release clauses are necessary for clubs that are in the situation of, for example, Crystal Palace. Or let's use the Benjamin Sesko example, right? RB Leipzig, a club that are competitive, a club that do pretty well in their own league, but a club that know and recognize that there are much bigger fish in European football than themselves. And as a result of that, they need that protection. They need to be able to say, if you want our prized asset, you're not going to come in, unsettle him, strip us of him, and not compensate us sufficiently for that. Release clauses are to protect the selling club. However, in some cases, release clauses are encouraged by players when negotiating contracts with clubs, because they maybe look at a club and think, this is not my final destination. I do eventually want to move on somewhere else, but I also want it to be reasonably possible that I can move on somewhere else. I'll tell you who is a prime example of where this went completely wrong. And he's probably someone who regrets not having a release clause in his contract earlier on in his career. And that will be Harry Kane. Because Harry Kane, I'm sure, will have wanted to leave Spurs prior to actually getting his move to Bayern Munich. And because there was no release clause, there was no set price at which somebody could come in and know they had a deal. It became incredibly difficult for him, because anything that people would throw at Tottenham Hotspur, Daniel Levy would reject it out of hand. And then the prices start getting crazy, ridiculous, and nobody thinks you're worth the risk. So release clauses are there to protect the selling club, but it's also in the interests of players to have them inserted if they feel like they want to move on at some point. And if you can find that balance between a release clause, like in the case of Benjamin Sesko, which ensures that RB Leipzig would get market value for the player, but also makes it not impossible, essentially, for him to leave, then I think that's where they work really, really well. What else have we got in the live chat? Let's take a few more of these questions. I am picking them at random. So apologies if I miss yours. Damien says, who are you hoping we sign at striker, SESKO or Osimhen? If you'd have asked me this a year ago or 6 months ago, I'd have said Victor Osimhen. I just think with the price at which Benjamin Sesko is available, having conducted greater research on him, I think he's the one that I'd lean towards now, because it's less money, which I think means you're taking less of a risk. But I also feel like he might be better suited to what we're looking for and to what would work in our system. Yeah, I think I will. I think I would probably lean towards him. Kieran Hodge makes a good point on the homegrown quota, by the way. He says it's a non-homegrown quota, not a homegrown quota, if that makes sense. Elneny and Cedric have reduced our quota, so we have some wiggle room. So, yeah, obviously you still need to have enough homegrown players to be able to make up a squad without exceeding that limit. But you're right to highlight that it is a non-homegrown quota rather than a homegrown quota, if that makes sense. And Quest on the release clause bit says bigger clubs don't tend to have release clauses. Can't think of too many Real Madrid players with a release clause. That's absolutely right. And the reason for that is because, they don't feel like they're in a position where people can bully them into doing deals. If you're one of the very best, who's going to turn your player's head? Like if you're at Real Madrid, what's the next step? Where better in world football is there than Real Madrid? I know we'll say Arsenal, but in terms of as a neutral player, Real Madrid is the pinnacle of club football. So, yeah. Says, would you take Chiesa from Juve for 40 to 45 million euros as Juve look to sell? There have been a lot of reports recently that Juventus are looking to move on Federico Chiesa this summer. It was suggested that he's not signed or is unwilling at the moment to sign a new contract with the club. And as a result of that, they want to sell him. Chiesa's father came out last week, if I'm not mistaken. I do try and keep across the Italian papers, saying that actually his son is very happy at Juve and would like to stay. There's also been suggestions that maybe he doesn't quite fit in with what Thiago Motta is looking for, who's going to be the new Juventus boss. And so maybe selling him would raise some funds and allow Thiago Motta to do what he needs to do in terms of improving the squad, getting it to where he wants to be. Again, it's one of those cases where I feel like the ship has sailed. You know, again, if you'd have asked me a couple of years ago about Federico Chiesa after the last Euros, for example, I'd have said absolutely yes, I'll bite your hand off to get him. The injuries have really killed Federico Chiesa to the point where I don't think he's the same player anymore. He's not as explosive anymore. He's not as direct anymore. Doesn't have those physical advantages that saw him stick out. He was a very when I was watching him early on in his career, he was a very un-Italian footballer, if that makes sense. Like he didn't look like a Serie A player. He looked like someone that was born to play in the Premier League, that could get his head down, drive at you, be incredibly direct, and had incredible pace. But the knee injuries that he's had, in my opinion, have taken that edge away from him. And I don't know if he'll ever get back to that level. And as a result of that, my answer to the question is no, not at 40 to 45 million euros. I think if he were to become available for half of that, then I would probably take a gamble, because I think there is something in Federico Chiesa that I really admire and I really rate. But to go and drop that kind of money on someone that I'm not sure is ever going to reach the form and the level that he showed in the past again. And he's not even old to say that, you know, he's over the hill and you'd be bringing him in as a bit part player. I find it very difficult to believe that spending that kind of money today on Federico Chiesa would be a smart move. Okay, guys, I am going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on this live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner. I really do appreciate it. Remember, if you're listening on audio, leave us a review, leave a like on this video. Let's try and get up to a couple of 100 likes if we can before I end the stream. Subscribe to the channel if your brand's spanking you. And if you've got any questions and you're watching this back on playback, leave them in the comments and I'll pick some of them up on the next show. We'll be back tomorrow with another one. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.